The last video I did focused on some comments on freedom from Tim Keller of the Gospel Coalition, so I decided to go over there to see what they're all about. Well, for one thing, I learned that Tim Keller died earlier this year in May, so there's lots of talk about him being with God and whatnot. Yeah, so that happened. But what caught my eye this time was a blog about Oppenheimer and the dangers of the sex scenes it poses. Obviously, the piece is not about atheists, it's not talking to us in any way, but it does illuminate Christian thinking about correct behavior. It's called Immature Defenses of Mature Sexual Content in Movies. And I don't think the writer actually establishes these defenses as immature. He, Cap Stewart, just disagrees. There are 2 points that specifically interest me in the piece. One is the way Cap contrasts biblical content with the sexual content of other films. And the second is how he frames the concern we should have about it as worrying about the harm it causes others, reminiscent of the Christian worry that they might be causing others to stumble. I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet. I have no opinion about it or on the sex scenes right now. We're just going to look at what Cap says, and there are no spoilers, unless the existence of sex scenes in a movie is a spoiler. So that's spoiled. Away we go. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I'm an atheist and skeptic, and I like looking at Christian content. And today we're looking at some pop culture critiques. Specifically, we're going to be worrying about sex in movies. Let's get started. Our author, Cap, starts us out. In a pornified culture like ours. We're in a pornified culture, y'all. Cap has done it. It's no wonder various scenes from mainstream films and television shows demonstrate a porn aesthetic, to borrow a phrase from academic Shelton Waldrep. I haven't looked that up. I don't know what that's about. We're just going with what Cap says right now. Anyway, so we're in a porn culture, and movies and shows have a porn aesthetic. Let's keep going. We're not just talking about raunchy comedies, erotic thrillers, or TVMA, mature audience, HBO shows. Thanks for spelling that out, Cap. Works of otherwise genuine artistry and quality storytelling can be tainted by the inclusion of a sex scene or two. I like the word tainted, so that any quality or artistry is actually sullied by the fact that there might be a sex scene. Now, from my point of view, I don't have a problem with sex scenes in movies. What I think is that sex is a part of human life that can be worth exploring. People have sex for all kinds of reasons. They can have sex that is for stupid reasons or good reasons. They can do stupid things in relationships. Sex is a part of all that. You can show bad sex to kind of normalize the fact that, sex can be all over the place. But anyway, it's a normal part of human life, so it should be a part of storytelling. Having said that, I'm not a fan of every sex scene that I've seen, and yeah, a lot of it seems gratuitous, a lot of it seems to get people looking at the movie or the TV show, and a lot of sex scenes seem to exist merely to tell us that the protagonist is a virile, attractive, straight guy, like this protagonist, not gay. I'm not a fan of that kind of sex scene. That's kind of where I'm coming from in my thinking. Like, I would like the sex scenes to contribute something to the story you're telling about the characters, make it more meaningful, but whatever. This is just my opinion, and people are going to like what they're going to like, and this can be something personal, we think. Not everybody has to be a fan of sex scenes. I'm not telling you what to like or dislike. If you don't like sex scenes, whatever. I guess I've been hearing my whole life from conservatives and religious people that there's too much sex on TV, and sometimes they'll say sex and violence, but really when I look online, it's the sex that they seem to get most upset about. I just even did a Google search while I was looking at this, and while there is some concern about violent content, it's not nearly to the detail that this little piece on the Oppenheimer sex scenes is going to be about. It's sort of like, oh, what a shame that there is violence. And, oh, don't we need more godly content? But it really doesn't get into, is that wrong? Is that hurting anything? I also have to wonder why there's no concern at, people lying or people disrespecting their parents or whatever other sin, you might see. The fact of the matter is, an interesting story that we tell is going to have some sin, I think, because what's interesting in storytelling is when somebody grows, when maybe you learn something. So you're going to do something bad and you're going to learn something along the way. That's kind of interesting storytelling. But is that going to poison the Christian who's watching? I don't know. All right, tangent over, back to Cap. A recent example is Christopher Nolan's acclaimed Oppenheimer. Based on my observations of online chatter, Christians, among many others, generally agree the sex scenes in the film are gratuitous. The disagreement seems to be in how to respond to such material. Okay, so my first question is, has Cap seen it? Because he only alludes to online chatter, and he doesn't talk about what he thinks these sex scenes are. So that makes me wonder. It's not a good way to make a basis about what the sex scenes are like. And like I said, I haven't seen it, so I have no opinion on the sex scenes. I've seen some chatter that people think that they are stupid, but I don't know. All right, moving back to Cap. Some outright reject films with hyper-sexualized scenes. Hot takes include, that film is nothing but a piece of trash. That probably is a lot of media. While the revulsion towards sexual immorality is commendable, such generalizations miss the complex reality that a given film might be a stellar work of art, with true and morally good themes, and at the same time morally compromised. It need not be one or the other. If a film shows something like a sex scene, how is it morally compromised? I don't know. It just seems like you as the viewer should use your discretion to decide these things. And you don't need to be impacted by whatever the media is showing you. And it looks like that's what Cap is saying people are doing, that they are actually using their discernment to talk about the film. Let's keep going. However, an equal and opposite error exists, downplaying the immoral nature of a porn aesthetic to justify the greater good of the overall work. Those who take this posture typically utilize at least one of the following 5 arguments. Each deserves to be addressed directly and reasonably. My first question is, how did Cap determine that this was a porn aesthetic? All he's talked about is there are some sex scenes in there. That, to me, does not say porn aesthetic. I guess my second question would be, couldn't there be something that exists between these two? Either you reject it completely for like a couple of minutes of sex, or you downplay it. I don't know. There must be other reactions to it. Okay, we're not going to delve too much further into this because we're going to go on and see what the arguments are. The first he calls the percentage argument. Some say we're talking about 2 minutes out of a 2-hour movie. The idea is that the relative shortness of the scenes negates any serious concern. The good far outweighs the bad. But assessing something immoral based on percentage is arbitrary. Are 2 minutes of pornified content better than, say, 10 minutes? Is a solitary 1-minute scene okay, but 2 1-minute scenes too much? Rather than answering subjective questions like that, we might want to ask better questions. There are issues much deeper than mere percentages. Okay, I can kind of agree with this, that the timing doesn't really matter, but still it does seem like if you say that there are 2 minutes out of 2 hours, that does seem like it's so little and the rest of the movie can be good. And I think you can come up with something in a discussion and determine how much is enough. Again, I don't have anything against sex scenes, so to me this is just ridiculous to be worried about this. It seems like we're spending way too much time thinking about something like this. Are you worried about the message in a violent movie at all? Okay. But let's go on to the next argument. Number 2. This is more interesting. The art argument. Some reject comparing simulated on-screen sex with porn. Yeah, me too. I would reject that too. It's a work of art, not pornography, they say. Nevertheless, it's far from prudish or draconian to suggest that in a porn-saturated culture, the lines have been blurred between porn in the context of narrative art and porn in the context of illicit pleasure. Even secular scholars are making the connection. In his recent book, The Space of Sex, The Porn Aesthetic in Contemporary Film and Television, the aforementioned Waldrop writes, ultimately, the line between what is and is not porn has eroded to the point that the distinction no longer has any meaning. Okay, so that's one guy's opinion. And again, we can have different opinions on this, and you can think it's a work of art, and you can think it's pornography, and we can have a discussion and support our points, and we can come up with a consensus on what we think it means. But let's go on. It's true that simulated sex in films and television usually avoids the explicitness of hardcore pornography, but defining porn as only that which is explicit in the extreme is reductionist. It's a refusal to acknowledge what even secular sources recognize, and it gives off a naive and nonchalant aura. Now, I agree that there can be bleed over between these two things, but I think you can make a distinction between porn and sex in other media. So to the extent that there might be a story in porn, it serves the sex. The story serves the sex, and the sex is there to turn people on. Whereas in films, the sex serves the story. You might, like Cap, say, well, isn't that subjective? Well, you can support your answer and demonstrate why you think that is the case. And you can talk about how here is the story, how does the sex fit in, versus here's a story that only serves sex. And so I think you can make a logical argument that can be accepted. Granted, people can argue with you because they can argue about everything. So it's not about could people argue with you. Let's go to the next argument. Number 3, the category argument. This approach broadens the category under discussion, so a rejection of a porn aesthetic suddenly looks like a rejection of much more. It involves rhetorical questions like, is all nudity an art sin? Do you want to castrate Michelangelo's David? And should we condemn the Song of Solomon too? Actually, these are good questions because I think they can get at when is nudity or sex in a piece of art okay, as opposed to sin. I mean, is there any depiction of sex that's okay for this person? I mean, I know that for Christians in general, sex has to be in this very limited way, but if you can't show any nudity and you can't show any sex, then you're eliminate a whole category of human experience from your story, basically. And yes, Song of Solomon, the Bible has some kind of pornographic elements if we're going to use Cap's terminology here. So let's go on and see what Cap says about this. In Christian circles, possibly the most popular form of this argument says the Bible's use of sexuality is R-rated. It sounds plausible because there are portions of Scripture that address grisly, gross, and graphic topics. But the Bible is a work of literature, not film. Checkmate, I guess? I mean, I find this interesting because there are people trying to ban books right now because they think the books are pornographic, and the Bible is a book too. I don't know why it's different because it's film, maybe because the images are explicit. Let's see how he completes this section. The Bible's text-based form, as opposed to the image-based form of films and TV, makes a world of difference in how its content is experienced. It's a mistake to conflate the vastly different categories of written and visual narratives. The Bible has never been, nor will it ever be, submitted to the Motion Picture Association for an official CARA, Classification and Ratings Administration rating. As such, Scripture isn't rated R or G or anything else. The categories are different. You know, I find it interesting that he just wants to make an exception of the Bible. Again, as we live in an era of people trying to ban books in certain libraries because they think it's too pornographic. But I actually think he has a point. The Bible does have a lot of explicit scenes, and there are all kinds of things that happen in the Bible that I think we would benefit from actually seeing so that we can take them in. Like, take in the devastation that would have been Noah's Ark. Take in the devastation that would have been those genocides in the Old Testament. But setting aside that, I'm not sure you even need to have the visuals for some of the things that happen in the Bible. I mean, there's a lot of incest. Just go look at Lot and his daughters. Or look at the immorality of David. I mean, I know he's technically repents and all that, but, you know, if you can take that kind of thing in, why can't you take in a movie? And I don't know you really need a visual on the Song of Solomon. Go read it. It's very explicit. And you have all kinds of sinning going on in the Bible, and yet you can take that in. So I think you could take in a movie. I think the content point, I think that's a good point. And not to repeat myself too often, but if the sex serves the story, I don't think it's really porn. If it's illuminating something about the characters or their journey through life, it's not porn. You don't have to go see it, by the way. Again, like, go watch what you want to watch. If you don't want to watch sex, you don't want to watch sex. Let's see what else Cap gets into. Number 4 is the sliding scale argument. This assertion compares one visual story with something obviously far worse. That show is nowhere near as bad as Game of Thrones. Such arguments assume the moral acceptability of a film or show, so long as it avoids sinking to the bottom of the barrel. Yet a moral standard is something to rise up and aspire to, not a baseline level of depravity to barely avoid. For the Christian moviegoer, sexual morality isn't a game of limbo, how low can you go? It's an issue informed by the allowances, prohibitions, and general wisdom of Scripture. Comparing one form of sexual compromise with a worse form of compromise is, at best, to flirt with practicing situation ethics. Our guideline for evaluating pop culture's malleable sexual ethics should be the unmalleable Word of God, not the lowest common denominator. It seems strange to talk about a movie or TV show as being immoral. The show itself, I mean. The characters in the program, sure, you can say that the character acted in appropriate or inappropriate ways was a moral or immoral character, and you can make that judgment. But the movie itself is just a story that's being told to you about human beings. And human beings do things that are wrong, and they do things that hurt other people. It seems to me people like Cap here think that when we watch a movie, that's definitely going to make an impact on us. And if we watch something immoral, it taints something about us. Like there's a contamination going on. But there's no contamination. What I would recommend for everybody, no matter who they are, is that they should be thinking about the messages that the movie or the TV show or the book is trying to communicate and deciding what that means. And are they good? And do they want to act like that? Or is this immoral? You shouldn't just take a piece of media at face value and say, yep, that's it, and passively take it in. And if you're a Christian watching this, it seems to me if you see a scene like this, you would say, oh, that's sinful behavior, and we shouldn't act like that. And then you're done. You don't even have to worry about it. So this notion that it's just there, and either we should watch it or we shouldn't, we should avoid a whole part of the world because it might be quote-unquote sinful, it's preposterous. It reminds me of all of these videos that are out there that should Christians have like a dream catcher? And oh my gosh, there might be spirits attached to it. It's like the show is going to seep into you. No matter what the show is, the most innocuous show, you should question the messages. Oh, that's just me, I guess. All right, last argument is the effect argument. This argument minimizes the overall effect of the objectionable scenes. Sex scenes are so boring, or they're more tedious than anything else. I've seen such words used to describe the main sex scene in Oppenheimer, but then I also came across this statement of the same scene in GQ. There is something deeply erotic about it. One person's boring is another person's erotic. Fine, I guess. All right, let's keep going. Making judgments about the effect of a particular film involves making judgments about the temptations likely to snare others, not just yourself. You may downplay how affected you are by sexual imagery, but it's often impossible for us to know what effect the same images will have on others. You know, that's up to others to determine. Like, we can have discussions about it, but we shouldn't determine what should be shown because it might have an impact on others. There are all kinds of ways that media can have an impact on others. We need to think about the impact on ourselves. Let's keep going. Ultimately, the effect argument unintentionally displays the desensitizing nature of pornified media on audiences. What does it say about us as a culture and a Christian subculture if one of our main responses to softcore sex scenes is, I find them boring? Sadly, the porn-infused visual diet of some Christians has deadened their senses to the point that they're actually the weaker brother, not the stronger one. I don't know. It's hard for me to make a judgment if you find sex scenes in movies boring. It may be because you're not there for the sex scenes, and so you think this takes away from the film. I don't know that we can jump to any conclusions about what that means. I don't know that you can jump to the conclusion that there's so much porn around, therefore you're desensitized to it. I don't know. I would need more information on that. But this whole part of worrying about how other people are going to react, I see this in a lot of Christian websites, this worry that maybe you're okay, but worry about the other person. And I would like to see a message out there more that you need to be worried more about yourself, not how things are going to impact others. Not always try to decide that something that's going on, if that might affect somebody else. Like, in the end, who gets to determine these things? Because my impression here is that Cap is trying to say that we need to be concerned about these things. And he's trying to address the Christian that may be reading this and maybe not care that there are sex scenes, maybe not see this pornified universe we live in, and he might want to tell them, well, you should care because it's going to impact somebody else. It's sort of a call to action for something that doesn't need to happen. Like, why are you worried about this? This is like the least worrisome thing. But it's also maybe he really wants us to understand that sex is bad, lust is bad, you're going to lose your soul or whatever, and so don't get desensitized, because ultimately I think when we see these things, we realize like sex isn't harming anybody, and we might decide, oh, it's not so bad after all. And maybe that's the worry. All right, let's read this conclusion. When immaturity masks as maturity, films can address serious and even sordid sexual issues without being exhibitionist or prurient. Examples from the last several years include Room, Spotlight, The Assistant, and She Said. I have no opinion on these movies. I haven't seen them. I know some things about them, but I haven't seen them myself. Mature content certainly isn't off limits as long as it's handled in a legitimately mature way, creatively suggesting what's happening without depicting it explicitly. Well, that's just like your opinion, man. That is an artistic choice. And that is up to the person creating the media to decide if they want to suggest or show explicitly. I think there could be a case made for either one depending on what you want to do. Sometimes creatively suggesting is not enough, and they really want you to understand what's going on with the explicit material. I guess at the end of the day, some Christian objection like, well, God doesn't like it, really doesn't matter in terms of what the artist is trying to do. All right, Cap goes on. Exactly how a film's artistry and morality weigh against each other is up for debate. It can be, but it's going to be the artist's choice in the end. Are there any contexts in which a Christian can patronize films that utilize a porn aesthetic in one or more scenes? Is it acceptable to use filtering services or the fast forward button to do so? At what point should a Christian reject an otherwise masterfully crafted work of art based on moral grounds? These are challenging questions modern Christian audience must grapple with. Yeah, and I would actually argue that it's up to the individual to decide that. But hey, that's me. Such questions aren't adequately answered, let alone genuinely addressed by the 5 faulty forms of rhetoric examined above. Through oversimplification, misdirection, and obfuscation, these arguments sidestep the presence and prevalence of a porn aesthetic in our entertainment. I don't think that they did. I think that each person has criteria for how they decide what they want to see. I especially think the art argument and the category argument address this head on. That is, in saying, this is a work of art, it has a story, and the sex serves the story. You can disagree with that. I mean, you can disagree with anything. But I actually think those do address your concern, and I think those are good ways to decide. Do you watch the movie? Do you not watch the movie? I mean, if this is your concern, I'm just going to watch the movie, I'm going to take it in, and I'm going to decide what the sex scenes mean. So Cap wraps this up. That's not mature. Functionally speaking, it isn't even a real argument, and it's an excuse. See, I don't agree with Cap at all. And first of all, I don't know why he says that's not mature. Even if you disagree with the 5 arguments he lays out here, I don't see why that would be considered not mature. I guess I just don't agree with a lot of what Cap has to say here. So I'm going to repeat myself again. Whenever you watch a movie, you watch a show, you read a book, there are always messages. Figure out what those messages are. See how they're being presented. What is the point of view? All of that stuff. Take it in and try to figure out what's going on, what's right, what's wrong, what you reject, what you don't. None of these should be passive experiences. Now, of course, I reject the whole sin categorization thing, and I'm not worried about taking something in and it damaging my soul or whatever. But I find it interesting that we're so worried about sex scenes, like 2 minutes of sex scenes out of a whole 2-hour movie, and we're not worried about other messages at all. Or we're not worried about other sins in these movies. It's only sex. Sometimes I get a question like, why do you care what I believe? It doesn't impact you. But the reality is that these Christians are in the world trying to have an impact on everything that's going on. And if they think that something is sinful, they want it removed. As I mentioned in this video already, there are people currently trying to ban books. Somebody actually did propose banning the Bible, which was hilarious, but you can see that Cap has a sidestep to that. That's different. That's an exception. But anyway, the reality is that our beliefs are not sequestered over in one area. They bleed over into everything, and some of these people want to impact everybody's lives. Now, I don't know that Cap wants to try to change anything else in the world, but he is impacting other Christians who might go out and want to change other things. Who knows? All right, I'm going to leave it there. That's all I have for you today. What did you think? Did you have a reaction to something that Cap said in this? Put it in the comments below. And while you're down there, you can like, subscribe, and do all the YouTube stuff. You're on YouTube, you know what to do. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. That link is in the description below, and I will see you very soon. Bye for now.